All right, everybody, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Hivers. Hive. We'll go ahead and get started. You like that?
That's pretty good.
I was just telling him when I rally the troops bring people in here, I like to call it kicking the hive. Yeah. So, you guys like that? Anyway, just a survey question. How many of you came from the South Jordan area right before this? Raise your hand. All right, how about like Provo area? How about Salt Lake City area? All right, so it's kind of a diverse group. Good to know. So yeah, just some housekeeping items. The restrooms are right by the elevator. You have to actually badge into the restrooms. So talk to one of the nice ladies by the front door. I guess I have to go to the bathroom. Drinks over here, food over here, obviously. Looks like you guys already enjoyed that. And yeah, just a big thank you to Lucid. You know, Lucid is not only hosting the food, hosting the event space, and a wonderful speaker, but they've also been our golden sponsor for a long, long time. So we're completely volunteer-based. We won't be able to do any of this without Lucid. So give them a... Next event is still TBD. We're looking right around May 2nd at the Silicon Flow space. So that'll be cool. But we'll announce that once the details are confirmed. Anyway, this event should be a really good one. With Jarom Chung here, he is a scientific background, and it's all about how he's applied the scientific method to product development, from ideation to deployment to validation and everything. All about de-risking, so I don't want to spoil it too much, but anyway, I'll hand off to you. Let's give him a warm welcome.
Awesome, thanks, Nick. So it's great to see a lot of familiar faces in the audience, and those who have hung out with me, worked with me before, know that I like to make a lot of jokes, and so I expect a lot of heckling during this talk, so feel free to like ask questions, like, I don't know about that, like, let's discuss. I actually prefer that. So when Nick came to me, he was like, hey, do you want to speak? I'm like, oh yeah, let's do it. What are good topics? So Dan, lawyer, CPO, and I'm sure many of you know him, he spoke last year. He talked about how to make product people into rock stars and kind of had this equation. And part of it, he went over this training that he and I developed around rapid de-risking. Basically, how do you make better products quicker, faster, okay? So we got a lot of like, oh, tell us more about this. So this is going deep dive into that a little bit more. But when I was talking to Nick, he's like, Jarom, you kind of have an interesting background. Like, can we like play with that a little bit? And I'm a little self-conscious of like, that's right. I was trained as a scientist. I have a Ph.D. I am a fake doctor, if you will. And so, but it was really cool. I feel like what has made me really good as a product person is actually my scientific training. And that even though I'm not dealing with cancer and with cells and with mitochondria anymore, the principles that I learned in that rigorous environment for years, I feel like has really made me into a better product person. So I'm going to share a little bit about like things that I've learned and things that we do at Lucid to kind of help speed that up. Oh, I forgot one more thing, housekeeping. I was told there's an exit in the back as well as the front if there's ever an emergency. All right, I did it. And we did badges for the bathroom or at the front. Okay, I did it. All right, so when I went into grad school, I was like, oh, how long is this going to be to get a PhD, to do your dissertation? And this graph I think is hilarious because it's so bad. They actually cover up the years 0 through 6. So it doesn't seem like it's that bad, but that's right. The median graduation time for my field was 7 years in life sciences. And at the time, my stipend was $32,700 per year. And I had just gotten married, and I was like, oh, in the next 7 years, I'm probably gonna have at least 1, maybe 2 kids. Like, how is this gonna even work, right? Like, so it became my goal actually. It's like, okay, I feel like I'm a smart person. I feel like we can make this better, faster. How do I do that? And so I'll just zoom in a little bit. This is a character defect I have. I like to prove people wrong, especially when they underestimate me or my skills. I'm like, I will show you that, you know? And so this is me in graduation. So I did it. I graduated, right? You can kind of see some beautiful diagrams. I wish I had Lucid to do this back in the day. Some cool kind of like, this is immunofluorescence, it's called. You actually highlight different proteins in different colors. It's kind of cool. But I actually was ready to graduate in 4 years, which is really, really fast. I ended up extending to 5 years because I did a couple of internships in VC and a biotech startup incubator space. But I was like, okay, we did it. And it's like, well, I would get the question all the time from friends and from peers. It's like, how did you basically cut the time from 7 years to 4? And it really made me think about like, okay, it's about working smarter and not necessarily harder. And the same type of things as you hear me talking a little bit about science, you'll start picking up these same things like, oh wait, products very similar. What prevents us from shipping a product in 7 years instead of 4 years? Or instead of 7 months, instead of rather 4 months, right? How can we do this? How do we actually do that a little bit better? So what it takes to graduate in science, for those that don't know, I basically like have to discover something new. As an academic, I have to add to the collective mind of human understanding, right? I had to find something net new. So here is the scientific method. And with this great infographic, it is so basic, right? First, you start with observation, right? So what do we already understand as a human race? Oh yeah, do I need to zoom in? Can you all see that? Okay. What does the human race already understand? More importantly, what do we not understand? What do we not know? The second one is to question. So choosing the right question is really, really important. Okay. Third is hypothesis, a reasonable explanation, a reasonable guess that's supported with understanding that you've researched and looked into. And then comes the experiments. As a scientist, I was trained to do experiments. Hundreds of experiments, many different types, dozens, like multiple dozens, right? And all those experiments would give results. I would analyze those. I would synthesize and draw conclusions. But oftentimes the scientific method is shown as like a very linear thing. It's not. As soon as you draw those conclusions, right, you go back. Is this answering the question? What did we learn? How do we refine that question? Is this refine my hypothesis? Are we still on the right track, or do we need to tweak it somewhat based on what we learned? That's most often than not what you actually do. And then it's like, okay, you need to iterate on the hundreds of experiments we did, right? This experiment showed us this, which means we need to actually change the course of the experiments we're doing. And eventually, one can hope, God willing, you write your dissertation, you write your papers, and you show what you learned into the vast corpus of human understanding. That's science for you, okay? And then part of it too is like you kind of see after you publish, what do people think? Do they still see the same information? Do they apply it in different ways? And when I think about it and coming now to product is actually not that different, okay? I see a lot of nods, like, yep. So I'm gonna uncover this one. Oh, goodness gracious. All right, send to back. Maybe I deleted them. Oh, okay, good. So for this, on the observation side, more often than not, we're thinking like, okay, what's the user journey, right? What are the pains the users experience? What is the market looking like? How are we thinking about our customers, right? The question, this one's a key one for me and my team, like, is this good for the user? Is this gonna be great for the business, okay? You've got your hypotheses. This could be a feature, this could be a product, this could be a startup, it could be a new venture. Will this be killer? Will this actually do what we want? Then you've got experiments. I remember interviewing at Lucid and I was like, still no product experience or anything like that. And like, hey, will you design an A/B test for us? And I was like, sorry, can you define what an A/B test is? And I was like, oh, I got you. Like, yeah, do you want a multivariate analysis or what? And they're like, oh, wait, just make it simple. I was like, okay. Like a lot of what we do in product, they're called tests. They're called experiments. We're doing something where we're trying to cause a perturbation to learn what happens afterwards. That's what science says too. You get the learnings, you decide what to do next, you iterate, you synthesize, right? Like product, if it was linear, would be not as fun in my opinion, and it's really rare that product is linear. That go back, iterate, right? Refine the question, refine the hypothesis, refine the solution. And then you get to like ship the feature, ship the product, launch the venture, right? So a lot of parallels here. So, couple of tips that I'm going to kind of talk about today. So my sciencey, producty tips. First one, be as heartless as a scientist. Not saying all scientists are heartless. We'll get to that in a second. Second one is know your why. Third is focus on the most important risks. Fourth is test the test. Test it early, test it cheap. Fifth is data trumps opinion. And sixth, is seek truth in all its form. I will note two things. One is like this audience is pretty diverse. You got people, in fact, we've got a couple of Lucid coming into interns this summer, right? Haven't had that much product experience, all the way to people who have literally decades of product experience. So my goal here is to kind of adapt this message to both sides and like kind of everything in between. The other message too is I'm going to say some things that are purposely a little controversial, and I'll kind of caveat some of them, right? So realize that and be like, feel free like, oh, well, what about this? I want to hear the what about. So I'll try to address those as well, okay? So be as heartless as a scientist. What do I mean by that? When I was a grad student, I had on my dissertation advisory board, literally the guy who wrote the textbooks, who found like the cell, in a cell, you actually have a skeletal structure. He discovered all that, right? He was so smart, so brilliant, and he was a jerk. He was like so harsh, and I actually loved it. It was so important for my career. And in one of my every like quarter, I have to defend and like this is what I've done this quarter. And he's like, Jarom, like this is great, whatever. He actually didn't say it was great. It's rare. He says it's great, but he was saying he's like, hey Jarom, like I literally don't care if you're right. I don't care if you're right the first time or the 100th time. Like no one cares. Okay. And I don't care how hard you work. Like I don't care about all these experiments you've done. I don't care. And then he's like, what I actually care about, what the world cares about, what science cares about, is about the truth that you uncover. Okay. And I realized that what made him successful is like he took the emotion in some ways out of it a little bit, that he was looking for truth. And that's what his goal was as a scientist. And in some ways, it's the same with us. Like the market doesn't care if you were right in your first hypothesis or your 100th hypothesis. The user doesn't care if it took you 7 years to build it or 7 days, right? What the market cares about, what the user cares about ultimately is, can our product deliver the value we promise to deliver? That's what they care about. It's not emotional, it's factual for them. They want value, they want productivity, they want speed, they want usefulness, they want cost savings. That's what they care about. They don't care if we're right or wrong. They don't care. And now when I say that, right, it's like, well, don't you need some emotion? Don't you need some passion as product people? Absolutely. And I love this from Marty Kagan. This quote, we need teams of missionaries, not mercenaries, right? This is like where it comes to, like, we need to be passionate about what we're doing. We need to care about the problem. We need to care about how this affects the user. But what he says also is like, hey, fall in love with the problem. Don't fall in love with the solution, okay? And the mercenary mindset is like, I'm going to build this gosh dang thing because we think it's going to be the best thing that we can ever do, right? That's a that's a mercenary mindset. The missionary mindset is like, we want to provide this value. There's many ways to provide this value. Let's figure out how we provide it the best. So once again, in some ways, be as heartless as a scientist, right? Get to that value. It's not about us. We're just the tools, the hands, but get to that value for the user and for the business. All right, this next one, know your why. I love this from Alice in Wonderland, from the Cheshire Cat. If you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. This has been used countless times, you know, countless discussions. I'm gonna use it for product. The most often thing that I see with product people, as we know, I'm biased here. I think we're some of the busiest people in our companies, right? And there is this giant laundry list of everything we can do. And I see this most often with young PMs where they are just constantly busy, but they actually don't ship anything. They don't provide any impact. I see a lot of analysis like, yes. I mean, even in ourselves, it's like, I see this with myself all the time. It's like, why am I even doing this, right? And that's what it comes down to, is knowing your why. That doesn't matter if you're the CPO or an associate PM or a new designer. It's like, what we're doing is going for that why. So with our teams, this is kind of some tips we give them, right? Pinpoint exactly what you are trying to learn. You could wander aimlessly until you have a certain direction. Know your why. So why are you trying to do this? How does it impact the customer and the business? Why would the market care about your feature, right? Why would the customer care? Like, is it even worth it? And then sometimes I find this a lot of times, it's, especially with new PMs, not always are they the best at identifying that why or like the value, and that's okay. Sometimes I ask them these questions of like, okay, then get yourself out of the mindset, right? Like, think about, why does your manager care? Try to get into their mindset, because they hopefully understand the why. Why would the manager's manager care? Why would the CPO care? Why would the CEO care? Why would the board care, right? And this why, like, it's a constant grounding for my team. It's like, especially when you are so in the weeds, which we do this all the time. From one meeting, you are in the microscopic view, looking at the bugs in the ground. And then the next meeting, you are like the 35,000-foot view. You have to go from one to the next. Sometimes when a young PM they're at the ground level day in and day out, it's hard for them to pull it out, right? So they start just going down the motion, going down this path, and not actually having that direction. So know the why. So this is where a lot of the de-risking stuff now comes in. Once you understand your why or your hypothesis, right, you need to understand the risks and the unknowns. And everything has risks. And sometimes risk can be a jargony business term. So I like to tell my team, it's uncertainties. Like, what do you not know about this product, about this feature, about this solution, right? And it's sometimes you ask yourselves a question like, what must be true? So I do this exercise with my team. It's like, okay, imagine you ship this feature and it fails. Why did it fail, right? What needs to be true for this to be successful? And what's important here with these risks is we do this up front, but it's over and over again. Once again, it goes back to iteration and the scientific method, right? What did you learn about this risk, this hypothesis? How do you refine it? There's this great article, Dan pointed this out to me. This is from, gosh, probably 15 years ago now. This is from Clark Gilbert, Matt Eyring. These are some Utah famous names. This is back when Matt Eyring was actually still at Insight in Boston. But great article, totally recommend looking it up, Harvard Business Review. It's about beating the odds when you launch a new venture. And they talk about there are these risks, and don't be naive to these risks. And most importantly, they go through, like, especially for a new venture, there are certain risks that are kind of deal breakers, which we'll talk about in a second. But some exercises that my team does is we actually go in and we have a question, we have our hypothesis, and you actually brainstorm all the risks. And like, this is probably 50, 60 different sticky notes, and you are classifying them. And it's important because as leaders, especially, to think naively that we know all the answers would be wrong. It results in poor products. It results in more expensive things we do because they fail, right? So I tell my team this too. It's like, even if you de-risk everything, you don't know 100% that it's right or wrong until it's out in the market. So we de-risk, and once it's out in the market, if it's already out and you didn't de-risk it enough, it gets expensive. You've built how many months, how many years on this thing? You've done so much marketing. How much time, labor, effort could go to naught? All the core about de-risking is like, let's minimize that risk and increase our confidence so that when we do something, it's not as expensive, okay? So the next step that we do is we categorize and prioritize those risks. So I really love this framework. This is from Marty Kagan, but also like Dan. Dan's been in products, gosh, 30 plus years, right? He kind of came up with his own. It's like, oh, they're basically the same. But each risk can be classified as one of these ables. So valuable, does it solve a real user problem? Will customers buy it or choose to use it? The next one is viable, and oftentimes we think about it as business viable. Will it help our business? Will it make us money? Part of this too is like, will the solution work for various aspects of our business? For instance, we have this great idea for this new product. If it doesn't work with our go-to-market motion, like, it's kind of not non-viable for our business, or we have to adapt our business strategy, right? Feasibility, can we build it? This one's important too. Do we have enough time to build it? Do we have the necessary skills and technology? And the last one is usability. Is it easy for our users to use? Can users figure out how to use it easily, right? Can they find it? Can they access it? I love these, and I love this order too. It's like roughly like the valuable and viable ones. They're typically kind of deal killers. Like, if it's not valuable, who cares if it's usable or not? If it's not valuable, we don't really care, right? But in the feasibility and usability, this is kind of a natural progression. But you'll see in this next step, sometimes they go above the others depending on what it is. So this is from Clark and Matt's article about like these deal killer risks. As the name implies, these are uncertainties that, if left unresolved, could undermine the entire venture. Such risks may be less obvious in the moment than they appear in hindsight after a catastrophe has struck. Basically, what we do as a team is we really want to focus on the most important risks that will save the most money and most time. We do this a lot, right? As product people, it's like, if we're going to fail, let's fail fast, let's fail quick, let's fail early. That's this principle. The way you want to fail actually is like you determine all your risks, you kind of prioritize them, right? So I'll give you this example. We have this deal breaker here. On here, we have a bunch of different little labels: viable, valuable, feasible, right? Viable. And we prioritize these. We put them 1 to N. And the ones we want to focus on the first is actually those deal killer ones. Because that's right, we could waste our time doing these, 20 some odd, different risks and de-risk those. But if we get to these at the very end, boy, oh boy, if these end up not being true, we've wasted so much time. So a lot of times this is an iterative process too. Like, for instance, this fall, we're shipping something larger and we're thinking about the agile space and like, how can we help the agile use case with Lucid products, right? And these risks, we did this. We have a whole series of risks that we started doing, right? And as we came back to it, like this last week, we're like, oh, actually, there's a go-to-market risk that we need to think about. We need to this is a deal killer. We need to prioritize this first, right? And so this act of like realizing the risk, reprioritizing, it gets us to the solution faster. And once again, we'll go to the next step of like, how do you answer these risks? The more you learn, the more you realize that what you thought these risk order were right, that was just a hunch that we thought with educated guesses in many ways. What matters is that getting that information and iterating towards the best solution. Okay. All right, actually, I'm gonna click this button. So this is, I have a nerdy passion around testing the tests and these methodologies. So, really quick, did I get the sticky note? Yeah. So prioritizing your risks and classifying them, this is probably where we see the most time, money, and effort saved if you do this right. The next one, though, is actually picking the right tests and experimentation. That's the next lever that we've seen as we've identified over countless years. When teams are really productive with the right solutions and the right impact and they do it effectively and efficiently, it's because of a good balance between these two. So picking the right tests or experiment is another way in which you can de-risk most effectively and also save yourself the most time. So this one happens a lot. When you're a product person, as always, you have to get good at so many things, right? And what happens is that you get good at certain type of tests or methodologies. And especially in young PMs, what you'll see them do is they'll just, oh yeah, I'm running an A/B test because I run an A/B test. I run an A/B test on everything, right? They actually don't question or test the test. And for instance, some tests are really expensive. Doing an A/B test, the development to do this, let's say on a cheap ways, it's a sprint, 2 weeks, right? Then you have to collect the data. And depending on how much volume you have, a cheap test, likewise, a quick test is probably a week, but even then it's rare I see a week test to actually be sufficient. You're looking at 2 weeks, right? A month. You're looking at now half a quarter, right? To actually get an answer to these tests. A/B tests are really, really expensive, okay? But likewise, I can do an ethnographic research and take a whole quarter to do it and understand these different pains and everything. That can be really expensive too. When we went to the new project, the team instantly started, we wanted to understand more around big room planning. It's like, oh, we're gonna do 10 user interviews across 3 weeks, we're gonna get this research. I was like, friends, go to YouTube. Like, this is well documented. Like, look at YouTube. Spend an afternoon, you'll find the answers you need. And then pressure test your hypotheses with these user interviews, of course. Like, there's a place for it. Not saying don't talk to users. I want you to talk to users. But there's certain things you can learn better from other means that are more effective than others. So that's this one, is like test the test and like be careful of just doing what you're doing because you've always done it that way. So this little, this document, I nerdily called it the de-risking Enchiridion because I thought handbook was just too plain. I'm like, I want something a little more sexy, right? It's essentially a handbook. And what we did is, and this one at the end, you can have access to this. It's our collection of all the different risk types. So you have value de-risking techniques, viability, feasibility, usability. And in it, you've got between, gosh, I think every section has at least 6 to 10, 15. We keep adding to it. But it's all these different types of ways. Like if I am de-risking on value, here are the different experimentation techniques I can use. Job and problem validation, day in life narrative, exploratory interviews, painted door, pain versus frequency surveys, benchmarking analyses. And what we've done actually is we kind of talk about, hey, when to use this technique, what type of questions it answers. Here are the strengths and limitations. And then we've got a lot of like, hey, this is how you do it. And then it's like an example. This is how like we've run it in real life. And so this deck is actually, I think it's around like 120 slides. And we love this because this resource, especially we love it for two reasons. One, it creates a vernacular at a company. So when I'm like, hey, new PM, actually, you can learn about this quicker if you do a quick painted door test, right? They're like, oh, I've read about that. Let me go find out what that is. Let me find examples. And recently we did it. I was working with someone, a PM and their manager, and she just went on to Slack. It's like, hey, has anyone had experience running a painted door? And got a lot of kind of responses on how to do it and best practices and things like that. It creates this culture of, that's right, there's more than just an A/B test. There's more than just mock testing. In fact, here's a list of 50 different things you can do. But what's important, once again, is like picking the right tests for what you're trying to do. And then part of this too is every test has limitations. And I think that's important for all of us to understand. It's like, no matter what we do, right? Depends on how we conduct the survey, we could get the answer we want, or we could get a very different answer. If you test it and you measure something with an A/B test, you can get the answer you want, or you can get more insights. And it's like, there are different tests and different things. So that's a big one for us, is like, hey, test the test. The next one here is test it early, test it cheap. In our frameworks, what we do in the exercise we like to do is like, you have all these risks here. They're prioritized from top to bottom, remember, 1 to n. And they throw in all these different ways in which you can actually test this risk. So using the de-risking enchiridion, they're like, okay, I can do an alpha for this, right? And that's going to take longer than a month to actually do that, right? Or I could do 1 month of work, discovery interviews. Hey, 2 weeks, I can do pain and story validation, storytelling. Or I can do this in 3 days. I can actually take the secondary research, think about all these use cases, and start creating this framework to then pressure test. And so, like, as always, we want to go towards the left-hand side. If we can do it quicker, sooner, cheaper, we should. Now, I'm going to add a little caveat here, is that there are things that the taxonomy of use cases will help you learn. Maybe you can get like 75% of the learning, right? But the confidence level you need actually is 95%. That's when you're like, okay, which of these methodologies gets us to the sufficient level of confidence based on what we're doing? And from what I've seen, especially working with various product leaders, this is where our experience comes in most into play. The PM doesn't know what level of confidence level is sufficient to move forward. They don't know the timing of this. They don't know how to actually, if they were doing a painted door test for the first time, they're like, oh, I'm going to run it for a month. I'm like, nah, dude, run it for 2 days. If you have enough N, 2 days is all you need, right? And so like, this is kind of a lot of discussion with junior and more senior product leaders. This problem and this skill set is actually very iterative. It is a skill, meaning that a skill needs repeated occasions, repeated failures, repeated successes, repeated data points to actually hone in this skill. And so Kevin's on the front. He's one of the people that I have the pleasure to work with. Recently, he and his direct report came into, I have these office hours once a week. It's like, hey, this is a new area that we want to actually test and understand and like learn quickly about. Net new feature, okay? And Kevin asked this question. I was like, oh my gosh, Kevin, you're brilliant. And we did this exercise. He's like, hey, Jarom, out of these 4 types of risk, viable, valuable, feasible, usable, for this feature set, which risk is the most important? And we could have gone through this exercise and like gone through it, but we actually did it verbally. I flipped it on them, as one does. I'm like, okay, most junior PM, I want you to actually answer it. Go through each of these 4, talk through what you think is the most important and why. Then Kevin, as her manager, went next, did the same thing between the 4. I did the same thing between the 4. It only took at most 5 minutes, right? And that discussion was so helpful for me as a product leader because I saw exactly where this junior PM was, where her head was at. Really insightful things and things I didn't think about because my vantage point and her vantage point are very different. And so we need to actually see both of our perspectives. And like that discussion for her to see how I prioritize them, we actually came up with like, oh, this isn't a value risk, actually, it's a usability risk. We have enough evidence to know that this is valuable, right? But it's usable, that's where we're going to get hung up on. And people may not think it's valuable if it's not usable. And so it actually cut off a lot of this different experimentation, a lot of this different work, and we focus on that key question. So this is an exercise that I'm like, gosh, I need to do it with every office hour. If they're starting something new or midway through the journey, let's go back to the why. Let's go back to the risk. Let's go back to like the type of things we're trying to learn, and then craft our execution to be the most effective in that vein. All right. I am somewhat busting through this, so I will keep going. It's all right, though. This next one is data trumps opinion. Okay. So once again, start out. Intuition is really important. And like there's times when I look at something like, no, this doesn't work with my gut. Like there's something wrong with this, right? But it's important to realize that intuition is most often than not years of experience to get that intuition. Like when I look at a metric, I have seen, gosh, literally hundreds of A/B tests, seen what has moved it up, what has moved it down. I've seen what has affected our top line, what hasn't, right? And when it doesn't agree with my gut, I was burned one time where it's like, oh, this is better than I expected by like 20%. This return usage is 20% percentage points higher than I thought. I was like, oh, awesome. Maybe I was wrong, right? And I didn't pursue that gut, right? Then turns out the query that was run was wrong. And it's like, oh, it's actually back to where the gut was. It sucked. It was expensive. And then I had to apologize to everyone. That really sucked, right? But so as I talk through this and realize that, yes, guts are important. They're based on experience. But this one, I want to do in the vein of, I'm sure we have all been that, where you have been in a room and we're just discussing like, this is the best way to do it. This is the best way to do it. And it's like, everyone's opinion is different. The more people you talk to internally, the more opinions there are, okay? Here is like, when I say data trumps opinion, it's just information, right? And that data, once again, our goal is to get something to the market that's valuable for our customers and valuable for the business, right? So us internally, we're not the market. We're not the end all be all, right? And there's far too often where the teams are in these rooms for hours, just iterating, when it's like, do you know what? You can find the answer quicker if you just get on a call with the user. Or go test it. I oftentimes, like, if it's a new concept, I'll test it with my wife. I'm like, look, you're a knowledge worker, doesn't use Lucid software. Try this out. And you can get so much more information and so much more data, so much more quickly, that it will get rid of hours and days of conversation because data trumps opinion, okay? And once again, like, doesn't mean we're dumb, doesn't mean we don't have good ideas, doesn't mean that it's not there, but like, get out of our own walls. We have to get that user feedback. We have to get that qualitative and quantitative data. So this one I kind of mentioned before, even if you have the perfect de-risking, we had this plan, we learned so much and things like that, it actually we don't know if it's going to be successful until it's out. So get it out, get something out, get that data, right? Stop discussing internally. And when I say the word data, oftentimes people are thinking only about quantitative data. That's not what I mean. It's like user feedback, that's data. It's qualitative data, A/B tests, market analyses, willing to pay, etc. I didn't finish that sticky note, so I don't know what that one means. I'm trying to think that. Pay attention to your gut. That's what it is, yeah. And that accounts. So let me just put this here. Guts. Whoever that was, plus 5 points to Ravenclaw. I assume you're a Ravenclaw. So, oh, okay. All right, I'll take it. So that one is, yeah, once again, like, intuition is important, but even myself, and I've seen hundreds of A/B tests, once again, treat yourself as a scientist. What you actually care about and what you think sometimes doesn't matter, right? So pay attention to that gut, but also know where you're wrong and where you're right. Be open to the truth, right, and finding it. So the last slide here is seek truth in all its forms. And I just put a little UFO there. But this one is, as a scientist or as a product person, right, at the core, what we are trying to do is trying to find the truth, trying to find value. And the reason why I like to think about it as science is there's something in science we call hypothesis. hypothesis bias, right? You're looking for the hypothesis to be true. That's the worst type of science to do, because it will cloud, like you will do the experiments and be like, you will do the experiments that show the data and you will interpret the data the way you want it to be interpreted, okay? We've seen this likewise in product. It's like, sometimes when I go through user interviews and user interview notes, I'm like, can I see your interview guide? If you're doing it in a hypothesis biased way, right, and not just trying to seek out that truth, you can frame the question in a way that you will get the answer you care about. My favorite one is like, hey, will you click this feature? Or like, will you click this button? I'm like, yes. It's like 100% of our people said yes. Like, yeah, because you literally asked them to click the button. Like, what do we expect here, right? We're really here, it's like, no, the question that's better is like, hey, will you click this button? More, it's like, hey, like, what are ways in which you would try to find this feature, right? Is it that button, or would they look somewhere else? I don't know. Like, make it more open. The truth is what you're trying to find out, like how they access that feature. The truth is not whether or not they will click that button. Okay. So in conclusion, and I'll, once again, like, hey, be passionate, be motivated, have your instincts, right? This is what makes us as good product people. The balance of that with the hard, cold, scientific nature of like, that's right, if you prove something incorrectly, the scientific community, like, they'll slander you. It's very terrible. It's never fun, right? So go with this eye of seeking that truth, finding that data, designing your experiments that can speed you up, maximize your results, and get the information you care about, because you know your why, and you have targeted exactly those questions and those uncertainties and those risks. So last one is, there is this QR code, and I have a bunch of templates, and this Enchiridion. For some reason, it will both record your email as well as have you fill out an email address. But if you are interested, we are more than happy to send this over to you all. But we've got 5, 10, 15 minutes of question time. Yeah, you're in the back.
So you spent a lot of time talking about how you make the decision to do a thing. At any point in this, have you set your go date, like when this thing is going to be to the market, or do you come to that determination later?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'm going to repeat the question for those online. I did it, Nick. Look at me. So the question was, and make sure I understand it too. The question was, we talked a lot about like how you make the decision and things like that. But where does it come to the equation of like, hey, we're shipping at this date, or when do we ship, and things like that, right? So I'm going to talk about the ideal world and also talk about the reality of the world. The reality of the world is like a lot of us are under deadlines, right? And we're like, this is the date, this is what we're going to hit, right? Which is not the easiest thing for product folks, as we all know. It's like, we love sunshine and daisies and do whatever we want. But also that date is helpful because it kind of can accelerate how we do it. When I think about feasibility, some of these techniques for feasibility is about value chunking and like what's required to get that value and what can we actually do, right? So like that's an important part of the equation of like, if you are under a deadline, a lot of these risks and like go, no go decisions, that risk is like, can we ship the thing in time? In fact, oftentimes we're under one of those right now. It's like, oh, we have this goal and like, this is a date. So it's like the biggest risk is like, can we ship this in time, right? And so that becomes part of the equation pretty early on. And that actually can guide, that's right, we don't have 3 months to be able to do this. We actually have to ship it in 3 months, right? So it's like, okay, what's the fastest way for us to learn? That can be the motivating factor to kind of collapse things towards that left side of the spectrum to get those techniques faster. And what I like about de-risking too is when you write all the risks, when you're under time constraints, you realize actually, do we need to answer this risk before we launch? A lot of times the answer is no. Get it off our plates. Get it off our plates, right? Focus on the most important ones. So it creates kind of focus there. So in the ideal world where we can set whatever deadline we want, deadlines are so important, as I'm a big fan of them. I'll say this from my friend Tim Crabb, right? Pressure makes diamonds. With this too, when I think about like, well, how do you set that date of like when is enough confidence or when is like enough kind of we know enough to ship it and things like that. I like the agile principles of like one of the tenets of the manifesto is like ship product as often as you can and get that so you can iterate, right? So a lot of these experimental techniques, right? Sometimes shipping looks like a painted door to get that answer, right? But you're shipping something. So but sometimes shipping it looks like a coded prototype that you're going around to alpha and beta users, right? And like playing with it. Sometimes code, like shipping it is an A/B test where we're limiting it to X percentage or a beta or an alpha. And I think for me, like as a product person, as a product leader, I will always push for like, hey, let's ship what we can in a way that we can provide our learning and our confidence. Like if we're not confident, I don't want it 100% on for everyone. Absolutely not. Or like our enterprise users, right? But once again, like the principles here, like the more you learn and the more data you can collect is actually from getting it out. So that's kind of why I also like, I default to decide like, no, ship something, let's learn. Even if it's for 10 customers, we can still learn a lot from those 10 customers, even if it's not millions of users. Yeah.
You talked about deal killing risks. Can you talk a little more about how you identify those? And have you ever had a risk that turned out to be really important that you didn't identify early on? How did you find that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the question is, how do you identify those deal killing risks? And second, have you ever been in a situation when you went down the line and you realized there's a deal killing risk you weren't aware of, right? I'll even add a third one of like, what happens when you never even knew about the deal killing risk, right? That's the most dangerous. I've been in all three of those situations, right? This one, once again, it's a skill set. So the more you do it, the more you like, this is going to kill the project, right? So the way I do it is, especially at the beginning, right? You identify all the risks. And it's rare as product people, we're supposed to bring the donuts. It's rare that we're doing this by ourselves. So I like to bring in the group, my product marketing counterpart, my UX counterpart, my engineering counterpart. Let's prioritize these risks together. So that's oftentimes, even if I don't identify it, someone else might, and that discussion helps us align on what that is. So that's the early one. The middle one of like, okay, what happens when you didn't see it from the beginning? What happens next, right? That happens probably and should happen majority of the time. Because if we knew everything, then why are we trying to learn? You know, like we don't know everything, right? So this one, I'll give you an example, right? We're working on something that's shipping in the fall. And I was talking with my product marketing counterpart, and we're like, okay, so we have this on the rails. We have our plan, our roadmap, our value chunk roadmap. We have this timing. We know where we are, our unknowns, where we know where we're knowing, right? And we were so focused on, once again, nothing matters if we don't know what we can ship in time, right? So that was like our top risk. And we kind of like had the other ones, but we knew that was so big. We like, let's just start moving on this one fast. Now that we have more breathing room, we started saying like, okay, we did a post-mortem, right? Always revisit, like, how does this fail? Now that we have this plan, let's revisit the plan. How does this fail? And we're like, oh, actually, our in-prog adoption is a big risk, and our go-to-market motion, how sales will sell this, is a big risk. And like, these are actually deal killers, right? So we're coming back to the drawing board, and we're actually doing a risk prioritization. We've got action items. We've got some working sessions. We'll figure this out. The last one is like, what happens with a deal killer that you didn't see before? That's the toughest one. And we should avoid that at all costs, right? And so with that one, the way you identify it is actually really important. So with any launch, the way that I like to think about it is I have this 1-1-1 rule for any feature, product, anything. One day after it launches, what does the data show? 1 week after it launches, what does the data show? 1 month after it launches, what do the data show? And were we successful in what we tried to accomplish? And the earlier you find that signal, like even shipping something at 100% is still de-risking. You're still learning. The learning doesn't stop as soon as you ship it. But like seeing it's like, oh crap, like that example, like that return usage, like we looked 1 day, 1 week after, and it wasn't until we caught it until 1 month after. It's like, oh crap, we had to then go back to drawing boards. Like, how do we mitigate this risk? And you go, it's hard and it's painful because we didn't catch it. The most important part too, especially as a junior PM, is like your gut is not calibrated here. And that's okay. You're early on in your career. Work with your manager, work with your CPO, right? I think even as senior people, I like to talk to our CEO. It's like, okay, this is what we think the biggest risks are. Are you seeing something we're not seeing? And I love that discussion because I'm asking for how do we fail? Because it's far better we are all on the same page of how we fail so we can mitigate that early. Yeah.
If your product's broad enough where you have a deal, two deal killers, let's say for this example, you have 60% versus 40%, and the deal killers are completely opposite, and almost the solutions behind them are conflicting. How would you go about, how would you go about addressing that? Would you reframe the product in a way? Would you focus on one, the larger of the two groups? What is that?
Yeah. let me make sure I'm understanding the question, and I'll repeat it likewise. So what happens when you're working on a project or a product or something, and you have two deal killer risks? And in some ways, when you are de-risking these, they show opposite things, right? Like one says go, one says no go, for instance. Like, what do you do in that instant? So this is when I sit back, I take an afternoon to myself, and I think, like, and I, once again, remove yourself. Like, let's look at all the data, not just for those, but like any data we've collected. And like, because data is emotionless, data is fact, but data can be interpreted in many different ways. So I like to look at it all together, and I like to look at it with fresh eyes. I like to bring in my team. It's like, okay, I need you all to look at this, because if we're getting conflicting results, that could be actually truth in both ways, but it may be interpreted funny, or maybe we did the test funny, right? Like, it's something there, right? Or I go back to like, or is our why different? Is our question different, right? In some ways, you have to diagnose these results, and it's tough and it's fun though, because it's like you're trying to like piece together, you're like solving the mystery, and it's about the interpretation. So I try to get all the smart people in the room. Like, this is what I'm seeing. Prove to me, like, let's take the opposite approach. Why would this be the case? Why would the positive be the case? And play devil's advocate, pressure test it. The classic one that like a lot of people, especially young PMs, face is like an A/B test. I've seen over hundreds of A/B tests, and I could probably say less than 5 have been silver bullet tests, meaning every metric we tracked was either neutral or went up. There's always a metric that goes down. Conflicting data results, right? When that happens, I tell this to like my Gen Z friends. I'm like, being an adult, it's not about choosing the silver bullet. It's about trade-offs and realizing those trade-offs. So even like with product or A/B test, it's like, hey, is this negative that bad? Are these positives outweigh the negative? Or for instance, in these de-risking occasions, like we got this negative data, or this risk is saying like, do you know what? Our market uptick is a risk because of the adoption, right? But the solution, the value is very strong. We've had products like that. We know the value is strong, but the user doesn't realize that they have the pain to want to use it. So that was a huge risk. Like, we should go forward and build this because it's innovative. It has a really good use case and all these things, but we're still working on our adoption, and we knew that was a risk, and we're still like learning to figure out how to de-risk that, right? Even though it's launched. Other thoughts? Yeah, please.
Do you ever get data back that maybe will split between different channels, different personas? Yeah. And you have to choose between the right persona, and it's not necessarily what you hope for. How do you go about deciding what channel to target?
Yeah, that's a fun one. So the question is, do you ever get results back where different channels or different personas say different things, right? Like, hey, it's really good for engineers, but whoa, product people hate this, right? Like, or something like that. Or like sales folks hate this. Absolutely. And when we've been in those instances, I kind of go back to the drawing board once again. It's very similar, right? It's like when you look at segmentations, it's like, okay, the numbers aren't lying, right? Like, how do we understand these results? So for instance, if it's different personas, it's like, okay, is it better for this persona because only this persona cares? Or is it that we haven't optimized it also for this persona, and this persona could care, right? And so like, that's when I start using other techniques. It's like exploratory interviews. Hey, how would this feature be helpful for you? In what circumstances would you use this, right? Like, why is it bad for you, right? And like finding that out. And so like, we've had occasions where we've actually iterated to a better solution because of that negative data. We're like, no, this group does care about it. We just don't have it spot on, right? But flip side, we have had those occasions where it's like, nope, only engineers care about this. No one else cares about this. For instance, we're working on this one where we're working on a solution of like diagramming automatically from code syntax, and I as a product person is like, nah, bro, I don't want any markup. Like, I'm not going to do it. Like, I don't want to see it, right? And so like, depending on how we do the test and looking at the results, it's like, oh, not that many people clicked on this. We lost on this, right? The segmentation actually says, no, engineers really care about this, right? Doesn't mean there's not value. It's more like, oh, maybe we target it only to engineer personas. So once again, it's like, it's about interpreting those results. And it's funny because as much as I say, oh, it's a science and the data is scientific, interpretation is an art. Product is an art. And we use it with information that is emotionless and we can see it, but how we interpret it and how we actually move forward, there's not a rule book on how to do that. So, but it makes it fun. Yeah.
You talked for a second about like forming a gut and like making sure you're reaching out to people. That's definitely the stage I'm in right now. Like, what advice do you have like moving forward to build that intuition, especially like in art and health?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the question was, I talked about building up a gut and how that needs time and like experience. Like, how do you go about doing that? I think this is, so I'm going to gear this mostly towards kind of newer product folks in developing that. I would say get messy, get dirty, and don't be scared to fail. Okay. And so like with my PMs, like on the de-risking and chiridian, it's like if I see them using the same technique over and over again, I'm like, hey, look in this, like study this out. Try 3 new things this week. And some of these tests you can do in an hour. Like pulling data, you can do in an hour, and that can actually give you a lot of information, right? I think also when developing a gut, give yourself the grace of knowing that it's not going to be easy, and you have to just keep pushing forward and keep learning, because that's how you do it. And I gave the advice to a couple years ago to one of this PM is stellar. He's so good. And like it's kind of like Midas touch. Anything he touched, it's like beautiful, beautiful, great solution. Like any output artifact he created, I'm like, that was a great strategic proposal. Like, give me more, right? And as a leader, I was like, hey, I won't use their name. Hey, awesome PM, your work is stellar. I need to make sure you know this, right? And I was like, I need to also, I had this story in my head. I don't think you're trying that hard. And I'm like, you're still good, but like, I don't think you're trying that hard. He's like, ugh. I'm like, he's kind of taken aback. I'm like, yeah, I think you can try harder and I think you can do better, but you're just kind of not. And it was like if you receive that feedback, you're like, oh gosh. And yes, is Jarom a jerk? Yes, Jarom can be a jerk on occasion. Okay, but he took it and I was like, hey, I want to understand the barriers that you have to doing this. And I think for a lot of PMs, a lot of them are type A, top of their class. It's a competitive field. To get a job even, it's a stroke of luck, but also you gotta be really good, okay? And because of it, a lot of these people don't like to fail. And failure is the best type of education. And as leaders, we can create this environment to have them fail. It's like, oh yeah, run this really quick. Like, great. Like, and like, hey, let's give you some guardrails. So it's like, oh yeah, don't ship it 100% to everyone. Let's do it with like 10%. Let's see how that is. And let me explain to you why that is, right? Or if they fail, gosh, we had to reforecast a company. Well, we are still reforecasting a company KR. And I hate doing it, right? It's like, I just feel stupid whenever I have to do it. But it's like, no, analysts, like, this is a blip in our journey. And like, we're going to own this and we're going to communicate it. And this is a blip in the failure. It's not catastrophic, right? And I think as leaders, it's helpful for us to make sure that they feel that psychological safety that when they do fail, they're not going to lose their jobs. And there's very rare instances when they will fail and lose their job. If that happens, I feel like it's our fault that we didn't prepare them for that, honestly. It's our fault if they failed that bad. So keep trying. Don't be scared. Try all these things in the book, right? Just keep going. Like, just have fun. I also believe that products should be taught as an apprenticeship. That's the best way to learn it, in my opinion. Say one more question. Yeah.
On average, how much time, effort do you spend de-risking?
Oh, that's a great question. On average, how much time, effort do I spend de-risking? Well, candidly, for me, I spend 99% of my time in meetings. No, just kidding. That's a great question. I think maybe I'll do it by different levels. I think at a young PM, right, I would say an ideal is probably with your other responsibilities, it's probably between 25 and 50% of your time, honestly. And I don't think people realize that what they're doing oftentimes is de-risking. So if you're in an estimation meeting, you are de-risking. If you're solutioning, you're still de-risking with your team. User interviews, you're de-risking. A/B test analysis, you're de-risking. Pulling data before to see entry points, you're de-risking, right? And so like for a PM especially, like their success is not only shipping, but shipping the right thing. And you need the necessary learning behind it. If I go like kind of mid-level of like kind of like say a senior group PM, thinking about how much time are they spending de-risking, it's a very different type of de-risking, right? They're de-risking, there's organizational de-risking with their people and like how do we train them up? There's de-risking of markets and like where the product space can go and the strategy. And because it's kind of broader in that sense, you know, how much are you de-risking there? How much is the market changing like day to day? Not much. Week to week, not much. Month to month, probably more, right? But likewise, you're helping your team de-risk more. So it's like, I'm a big fan of like working sessions. So it's like, oh yeah, I'm with my team even now as a VP. a couple hours a week de-risking. So like at my level, right, how much am I de-risking like major markets and new product areas? Gosh, it's more like, it's like almost like every 6 months we do something big, and it's a lot of de-risking, and that kind of carries out. But am I doing the actual de-risking? A lot of it is me delegating that de-risking to others. But when I do check-ins or like see the progress, my favorite thing is actually to see the learnings. And that's what I like to discuss, because like the synthesis is all about, is this the right solution? My brain is this going to help the customer? Is this going to help the business? And sometimes those ICs aren't seeing it. So at that level, gosh, I don't know of a percentage, but a lot of my meetings are like, here's this risk, how are you going to learn and figure it out? So I don't know. I feel like ideally, even for me, I probably am thinking about de-risking something probably 25, 30% of my time. But don't fixate on those. I don't know. I have to think about it more. Okay. Hey, Pat, do I have questions from the audience? Oh, no, we're good. They're just comments, so.
All right, everybody. Thank you for coming. You've made the Hive proud. I gotta stop with these B references. One thing I would like to ask of you is if any of you are interested in ever hosting an event, please let me know either through the Slack channel or through LinkedIn. My name is Nick Boulanger. Also, if any of you know someone who you think would be a really great speaker, really bright, and the community would benefit from, also let me know. So thank you all for coming. Let's give Jarom another round of applause.